Hey, what's up YouTube? Jeremiah Hersey here. Welcome back to the next PL300 test prep question. Today we're going to be looking at a question relating to row level security and using DAX functions such as username or user principal name or user object ID. Now, one thing that you need to understand is that when you use username or user principal name inside of the Power BI desktop, when you're looking at those credentials, it's based on the domain and the user locally. When you publish out to the Power BI service, it's whatever credentials that you're logged in as. And so you're going to see a difference between what the username or user principal name states in the desktop itself and what it shows as in the Power BI service once we publish the report. We're also going to talk about implementing security through relationships as well. So let's go ahead and get started in the Power BI desktop. So here we are in the Power BI desktop, and you can see that I have three different cards displayed. The first one is the username, and these are just measures that I've created so that you can see what it displays. So the first one is the username function. It displays the domain and the user, and so you can see this is my laptop and my Carts and Robbers, which is my original business that I created. And we can also see down here locally the user principal name also displays the same thing. At the bottom we have what's known as the user object ID. The user object ID is from Microsoft Entra ID for Power BI or for Azure Analysis Services models, or SID for SQL Server Analysis Service models. And so this is just basically the object ID, the identifier for Power BI. So what you're going to notice here is that as I look into the Power BI service, so as I publish this report out, it's going to look a little bit different here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and publish this report. It's going to ask me to save my changes, and I'm just going to publish to my workspace. Now that this is published, I'm going to go ahead and open that up. So you can see here in the Power BI service that the user name, the user principal name, and the user object ID are all the same, and it's based on what I'm logged in as. And so I'm logged in with my company's email address, and so it's showing my email address for SME. And with this, we can now start to understand how this is going to change from our local device into the Power BI service. So as we publish to the service, just understand that they're going to change, and it's going to be different than what we see locally in the Power BI desktop. So let's go ahead and go back to our desktop here. So here I am inside of my Power BI desktop, and one of the things that we want to look at is the relationship. And so if I look at the relationship between these two tables and I right click on the relationship and go to properties, what you're going to notice is that when you implement row level security, that you're going to have this feature. So notice down here at the bottom, we have this option to apply security in both directions. And so the reason that this is turned off right now is because the cross filter direction is single. So notice it only flows in one direction. But if I change this to both, notice that this now becomes available, and I can check this. So if we implement row level security, we can implement it in both directions here. So that's what that checkbox is for, is to apply row level security in both directions. We can also see that when I click OK now, that this relationship now is going both ways. So both tables can filter each other. And so you have the ability to change how your security is going to be applied. So if that filter direction is both, you'll be able to apply that security filter in both directions. And so if I go up here to manage roles, so at the top of the screen here, I'm going to go to manage roles. This is how you create row level security, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new role here. And so I'll call this username. And so this is going to be based off of a specific field or column. So I'll choose my table. For instance, in my customer table, I'm going to add a filter, and this one's going to be to the email address. Now, in this value section, this is where we're going to put either the username or the user principal name. And so when we use those, this is going to bring back an email address as we publish into the service. Typically, you would want to use user principal name, but username would also work as well. And so we're going to go ahead and use that username here, and we'll go ahead and click save. And so that's how you create a security role. And with that, you're going to basically limit the data that you're going to be able to see. So if whoever I add into that security role in the service does not have the proper permissions, they're not going to be able to see the data. It's going to effectively limit the data. Now, because we're using some dummy data and we're using a customer table, my email address is not going to be associated to any information inside of this report. It's not going to limit it because my email address is not in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at our test prep question. The test prep question says you have the Power BI model shown in the following exhibit. A manager can represent only a single country. You need to use row level security to meet the following requirements. The managers must only see the data from their respective country. The number of RLS or row level security roles must be minimized. Which two actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. So as we look at this, the first thing that we want to identify is what the relationships are and where our manager information is located. And so we can see here that the manager and manager email is associated to the country table. We can also see that there is a single filter direction from country to the purchase table. But we also have to be aware of this filter that is in both directions. And so while we have a purchase table, we also have a purchase detail table, which filters in both directions. And so with that, we have to make sure that our data is secure, because remember that the manager should only be able to see the information related to their particular country. So country ID is going to be the relationship for our country table. So we'll see country ID in both of these tables. So that's what the relationship is built on. For the purchase and purchase detail, that's going to be the purchase ID. So there's one purchase ID. We can see that it's the one side of the relationship, and there's going to be a purchase ID in this detail table that's the many side of the relationship. But it's going to be able to filter back and forth because of that filter being in both directions. Now, as always, we have to look at some of the important things that it tells us here. That first and foremost, that managers must only see data from their country. And the number of roles must be minimized. So we want to create as limited number of roles as possible. So as we look here in our options, so the first option says create a single role that filters the country manager email by username DAX function. Well, we saw that the username based on who is logged in is going to return the email address. So with the email address, it's going to allow whoever's logged in to access that particular information. Now, one thing that we have to be careful with is, although we saw with our user object ID that it did return the email in the service, depending upon how this data is set up, if it's going to use Azure Analysis Service or SQL Server Analysis Service models, this could be potentially different. So although we saw that yes, the user object ID did return the email in my case, but if you're using one of these other services, it could be different. So that's something that we have to be aware of. ideally, when you're setting up row level security based on an email, you want to use one of two things, either the username or the user principal name. So those are the two ideally that we want to use when we're focused on using an email address. We want to use either the user principal name or the username, because in this scenario they're giving us the option of username or user object ID. We would want to go with the username function because that user object ID could be something potentially different than the email address that we want. And so we're going to go ahead and eliminate option B. Option C says, for the relationship between purchase detail and purchase, select apply security filter in both directions. Remember that part of our parameter is that managers must only see the data from their country, and so we need to make sure that whatever security we set up over here on this country table is going to permeate all the way through to our detail table. So this is definitely something that we want to take into consideration. So we'll leave that as a consideration here. Option D says create one role for each country. Now, remember that one of our parameters is that we want to limit the number of roles that we create. If we create one for each country, that could be a lot of different roles that we're trying to manage. So ideally, we would want to make sure that we use the email, because whoever's logged in, we just use one security role based on the username who's logged in, and we won't have to create a bunch of different roles, one for each country. So we're going to go ahead and eliminate option D. Option E says, for the relationship between purchase and purchase detail, change the cross filter direction to single. Well, if we change the cross filter direction to single, it's only going to allow the filter from purchase to purchase detail. But remember, we're implementing row level security. So if we want this security to permeate through the tables, then we're going to need to use that option to apply the security filter in both directions. And so this would not be the correct answer, because we want to make sure security role applies across all tables. So the correct answer would be A and C, create one role based on the country table manager email using the username function. So as the manager logs into the Power BI service, it will recognize that that manager has access to that specific country, and that security is going to get applied through the filter all the way through down to the purchase detail table based on who's logged in. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content. I'll see you in the next one.